Welcome back, everybody. This week we're going to start with some survival mechanics. We're just going to do one, starting with thirst. So you can see in the bottom left, I have the demonstration already up. My thirst bar is decaying somewhat rapidly, and soon I'll need to go find something to drink, or, in theory, this would trigger a game over effect when it ends. Right now, the slider won't actually end the game, because this is just a demonstration. But that's the idea. Think of it as similar to something like Minecraft or Ark or Rust, any other sort of survival-themed game that you can think of where you need to keep finding food or water to stay healthy. This is just the first step in that process, and we're not going to take this all the way just because we don't have time to do it. But if you're interested in learning more and taking this further yourself, I will be showing a link to a really great tutorial series that can show you how to go way farther with your survival game, if you're up for it. So I'm going to jump over to a scene where this isn't all done, so I can show you how to get it done. Alright, so here I am in my scene, but I have no slider to represent my thirst. Let's start building that mechanic. The first thing we need to do is create a UI element, a user interface, that we can actually look at and see where our thirst level is at. To do this, we'll come over into our hierarchy. You can either click on Create or Control-click down here, and then we'll go down to UI, and first we'll go to Panel. Now, you can see in my camera view right here, there is a panel popping up, but it's kind of hard to see what to do. So to start working on this, I want you to click on 2D right here to snap to a 2D view, and then just double click on your panel. And now you can see your panel, and basically, in the game view, this panel will be filling up your entire view. Now, we don't want it to cover the whole view. We want this to be a user interface that takes up one small corner. So for mine, I'll be taking my panel, and I'll grab the top right corner, and I'm going to scale this down quite a bit so that this is just a panel that's somewhere in my bottom left. So if I go back to my game view, I can see, okay, here is where my thirst slider is going to be. It's also a good idea to make sure that this stays in the bottom left corner, no matter the screen resolution or size of your monitor, to come up here and click on this bottom left corner. This will help anchor it into that position. But that's just the panel. Now, we want to add a slider. So again, you can go to Create or Control-click. I'll Control-click right on my panel in the hierarchy. And I'll go down to UI, and no surprise, we'll be selecting Slider. Now, because I had my panel selected, my slider showed up right here. If yours showed up in the middle of the screen because you didn't automatically attach it to the panel, that's okay. You can take your Move tool and you can move that slider wherever you need it. But since mine is already right here in the panel, let's take a look at what we can do with this. So in our inspector, we can see that there's a value here. And when I change this value, it changes where the slider is. This basically goes from 1 to 0. But we'll set this to represent something more like 1 to 100 or 1 to 50 in our code. For now, you can see how the slider works. This is a really easy way to represent to the player where their health or thirst or hunger or any number of things that they might need to keep track of are at. Now, it might help to make this visually represent what it's doing a little bit better. Now, this is pretty plain and gray and doesn't exactly look like a health or thirst slider yet, so let's fix this up a little bit. First off, I'm going to expand my slider in the hierarchy to look at all of its little pieces and parts. And we've got the handle here, which is this big dot. Now, if we wanted the player to be able to, adjust a setting in the game, this handle could be great. But because this is just like a health or thirst slider, we don't really want that big handle right there. Or at least I don't. So I'm just going to Control-click and then delete the handle component. Next, let's go to the fill area. The fill area, when I expand that, has this actual fill object here. And that's what this will look like as the slider fills up. The more of this we have, the better off we are, right? If we have the slider filled up, that means that we're not thirsty, we've drank plenty of water, we're feeling good. So to make this visually sort of represent that, let's make this like a bright blue color to sort of let the player know that, hey, when this is full up, you've had plenty to drink, and you're doing great. So I'm going to go find a nice bright blue to represent when we've drank a good amount of water. Now we can go to the background and let the player know when there might be something that they need to start worrying about. So we can change this color to be something like a light red. So the player knows, all right, this is where we're not doing good, and this is where we want to be. So now if we go and just play around with the value of our slider again, you can see running out of water and drinking up plenty. If you want to make sure that the player knows exactly what this represents, it's not a bad idea to add in some text into your UI. So again, right here on my panel, I will Control-click and I will go down to UI, and this time I'll select text. Now my text isn't positioned perfectly, but for right now I'm just going to take this and change the new text to simply say thirst. And now in my scene view, I might go down here and start making some adjustments. Like maybe my slider being perfectly centered actually isn't the best thing. Maybe I want my slider to go up to the top of the panel, and then I'll take the text and I will put it down below the slider. So there's my text. I can change other things like the size of the font or the font style. I can change the color of it. Like a bright white might actually make this easier to see than the dark black. So now if I were to go test play my game, in the bottom left, I have this slider that's clearly labeled as thirst. It's got a blue color for when I've got water and a red color for where I'm running out of water. And visually this looks okay, but it's not doing anything. What we want is for this slider to continue to go down at a steady rate until I find a source of water that I can consume, and then have it go back up by however much water I consume, whether it's 1 bottle or 1 gallon or something like that. So you guessed it, it's time to go write some code. So to keep myself organized, I'll go into my scripts folder. And speaking of organization, before I write the script, you might want to do something like in your canvas, where you've created this panel and slider, you might want to do something like rename this slider thirst, so that we know what it's for in our hierarchy. Now, if you only do this one, it probably won't be that confusing. But if you were going to make a more robust game where you've got a hunger slider and a thirst slider and a health slider, which the full tutorial that I'm linking will show you how to do, this could be a good idea just to keep organized. But to start the script, you should already know, we'll control-click down here, hover on Create, select C# script. I'm going to name this Player Vitals. I could call it Player Thirst, but just in case you want to do more with it, I'll call it Player Vitals to keep it broad enough that we could do several things with this. I'll double click on it to open it up in MonoDevelop. Jumping into the code, we need to do something right up at the top before we go any farther. Right below using Unity Engine, we'll be putting, well, basically the same thing, using Unity Engine, but add a .ui, and of course end in a semicolon. Then we'll go down below our mono behavior. We don't need to change anything in that line. So going down below it, we need some public variables. First, we need to make sure that we can talk to our slider. So we'll write a variable for this. Public slider with a capital S, and then we'll name this thirst slider. And end in a semicolon. Next, I'll go down just one line and add a public integer, int for short, max thirst. So this is the highest number that will be available on our slider for thirst. Then one more public integer for the thirst fall rate. This is the rate at which your thirst will decline, or how quickly the player will become thirsty and need to get something to drink to fill that bar up. Now in our start function, we just need to initialize a couple of these variables. So our thirst slider dot max value will simply equal max thirst. Sounds pretty simple, right? The max value on the slider is equal to the max thirst that we set up. Next, thirst slider dot value is equal to max thirst also, meaning that we'll start out not being thirsty at all. Our thirst slider will be full. We won't need to take a drink right when we start the game. Now down to where the real work is done, inside of our update function. So going beyond this first curly bracket into our update function, and if you want, you can make a little note to yourself here. I'll put / thirst controller, so we know exactly what this is. It doesn't actually do anything, just a note to ourselves there. So we're starting off with an if statement, and then we'll be going into a couple of else ifs. So first off, if thirst slider dot value is less than or equal to 0, we're going to do a thing. So we need to create another set of curly brackets. You'll see I've got the closing bracket here and the opening one right here. So inside of this if statement, so we say if the thirst slider value is greater than or equal to 0, this is really going to take effect during the greater than period. So if it's greater than 0, the thirst slider value will decay at a rate of time dot delta time divided by our thirst fall rate, and end that in a semicolon. So this is basically just determining our rate of decay, how quickly or how slowly our thirst will decline and the player will become thirsty. Now we're going to go below that, outside of that curly bracket, but still we should have two curly brackets below us. We should still be in our update function, but outside of our if statement, and creating a new else if statement that if the thirst slider value is less than or equal to 0. Now I need two more curly brackets here to open and close. For some reason MonoDevelop wants to bump this up a row, but I'm going to push this back down so it's easier for you to see. So else if the thirst slider value is less than or equal to 0, we're going to trigger game over. Because this is our only slider, we'll say that if you become too thirsty and you run out of water, that it's game over. So I'm going to write game over here. And for right now, it's in red because this is trying to call up a game over function that we haven't created yet. So we'll go do that in just a minute. So this should be red for you right now. Don't worry about that. It'll be fixed in a minute when we finish our code. Now we want one more else if statement down here. So else if, and then inside of our brackets, the thirst slider dot value is less than or equal to max thirst. Now I need two more curly brackets. As always, MonoDevelop wants to bump this up. I'm going to push it down here so you can see it more clearly. So inside of our last else if statement, we will say that if the thirst slider value is equal to max thirst, so we will say that if the thirst slider value is less than or equal to max thirst, then the thirst slider value is equal to max thirst. This one's not very exciting, but it's necessary to get the job done. So to fix this red part here, it's red because it's telling us that there's something wrong here. Just before our last curly bracket, so I'm going to come down here and make a little space outside of my update function. So beyond this curly bracket, I'm going to do something real simple here. I'm just going to type void game over, just the same way that I wrote it in my void update. And then I'm going to add a couple curly brackets, opening and closing. And in here is where we could write code that would cause some sort of a game over screen, whether it's just the words game over to pop up on the screen, whether it restarts the level or takes us back to a menu. We're not actually going to program this to do anything specific right now. I'll just put a note in here. Do something that ends the game. So this isn't going to have much of a function yet, but this function could end your game, restart the level, take you back to a menu, whatever you would want to do in a game over scenario. If we get enough time, maybe we'll flesh this out. But for now, it's just there when and if we need it. So let's go do a quick file save and jump back into Unity. So let's click on our FPS controller and we'll scroll down a little bit in his inspector. And we are simply going to take our new player vitals script and we are going to attach this in the inspector. When you see this little blue line show up, you know it's going to work. I'll drop it right there. So here we have it, but we need to do just a little bit of tweaking to really get this working. Where it says thirst slider, it doesn't know where that slider is. All we need to do is go and take our thirst slider right here and attach it to this empty slot. So now it knows what the thirst slider is. Our max thirst, well, you can really set this to be just about whatever number you want. I'm going to set it to 50 for right now. And the thirst fall rate, the lower this number is, the faster your thirst will decline. So if I set this at something like 1, then it's going to fall pretty fast. If I set it at 0, my thirst is going to evaporate immediately. If I set it at 10, it's going to take a long time. Now, 1 is probably too fast for actual gameplay unless you want to be thirsty all the time, constantly running around trying to find more water. But for the sake of demonstrating, let's set it to 1 for right now, just to watch it decline. So you can see it's not crazy fast, but it is fast enough that I would need to run around and look for water kind of a lot. But it's falling fast enough that you can see it in action. So if you want this to feel a little more realistic and you want your thirst to decline more slowly, so, you can actually walk around and do some things in your game and then eventually realize, uh-oh, I'm getting a little thirsty, I should go find something to drink. So there's a couple ways you could do this. You could set your max thirst from 50 up to 100, and then it would take twice as long for that to decay. You could also turn up the thirst fall rate, which it might be a little misleading. Maybe there's a better way to name this, but if I were to set this even at 5 instead of 1, and with the max thirst at 100, it will still decay, but it's going to be quite a bit slower. If you watch it carefully, you'll see that it is happening. But now we have more time to walk around our environment, explore, and get things done, and thirst won't always be on our mind, but sooner or later, we're going to see a little bit too much red in that bottom left-hand corner and realize, uh-oh, I gotta find a drink or I'm not gonna make it. So you can play around with those numbers and decide what's right for you. You could change this thirst slider into a hunger slider, or just a health bar in a lot of different ways, depending on whether you want the player to need to find, water or bandages or food. That's really kind of up to you. Or again, you could follow the full tutorial that I'll be linking, and you can make it so that when you run out of thirst and or food, then it starts to affect your health, and you can repair those 3 different sliders using 3 different things. If you put your mind to it in your free time, you can definitely pull it off. So this is just the beginning of our survival mechanics, but it's off to a good start. And in the next video, we'll be looking at how to actually pick up an object that will help refill these bars. Until next time, good luck and have fun.